My name is Kevin, 67 years old, and I built this house with my own 2 hands. Never thought I would end up feeling like an unwelcome guest in it. When my son David and his wife Amanda asked to move in temporarily after their wedding, I was happy to help them save for their own place. What was supposed to be 3 months somehow stretched into 2 years of mounting tension. I charged them minimal rent, cooked their meals, and overlooked their messes. But when Amanda called me the maid in front of her parents, something inside me finally snapped. Where are you watching from today? If you have ever dealt with ungrateful family members, hit subscribe and join me for this journey. I was born and raised in a blue-collar family in rural Pennsylvania. My father worked at the steel mill for 40 years, and my mother was a seamstress. They taught me the value of hard work and the dignity that comes with building something with your own hands. I followed in my father's footsteps initially, working construction jobs starting when I was 16. I never went to college, but I learned everything I needed on those job sites. By 22, I had established myself as a reliable contractor, and by 30, I had my own small company. We specialized in custom home builds for middle-class families. Nothing fancy, but quality work that I was proud of. That business supported me for 45 years until I retired 5 years ago. Nancy, my late wife, was the love of my life. We met at a friend's barbecue when we were both 24. She was a kindergarten teacher with the most patient soul I have ever known. We got married after dating for 2 years and struggled together to afford our first small starter home. Those were lean years, eating ramen noodles and beans, working overtime shifts, and saving every penny. It took us 7 years to save enough for a down payment on our first real house. When Nancy got pregnant with our son David, we realized we needed more space. That is when I decided to build our dream home myself. It took 3 years of evenings and weekends, with friends helping when they could, but we finally finished this 3-bedroom, 2-bathroom ranch-style house on a beautiful acre lot just outside the city. Nancy cried when we moved in. She called it our forever home, and she was right. Even after she passed away from breast cancer 5 years ago, I never considered leaving. Every corner of this house holds memories of our life together. David was always a good kid, smart and kind-hearted like his mother. Unlike me, he was academically inclined. Nancy and I saved enough to send him to state college where he earned his business degree. He was not quite as independent as his older sister Sarah, who moved out at 18 and built her own successful life as a physical therapist 3 states away. David always leaned on us a bit more, calling home for advice or money more often than I thought was necessary for a grown man, but he has a good heart, and I was proud when he landed a marketing manager position at a respectable firm in the city. That is where he met Amanda. They worked in different departments of the same marketing agency. According to David, Amanda was the rising star in client relations. She was 28 to his 32, ambitious and sharp as a tack with a degree from a fancy private university. Their workplace romance blossomed quickly, and David was completely smitten. I remember him telling me, "Dad, she is out of my league," but somehow she chose me. They got engaged after only 8 months of dating. I thought it seemed rushed, but David was happier than I had seen him since before his mother passed, so I kept my concerns to myself. The first time I met Amanda was at a dinner David arranged at a high-end restaurant I could barely afford. She was undeniably beautiful, with perfectly styled blonde hair and a dazzling smile. She was charming and seemed genuinely interested in my construction background, asking thoughtful questions about the homes I had built. I was impressed by her intelligence and how she made David light up. Their wedding was an elaborate affair, mostly paid for by Amanda's parents, Harold and Judith. They were clearly well off, Harold being a successful investment banker and Judith a former marketing executive turned philanthropist. The wedding was at a vineyard with over 200 guests, most of whom were Amanda's family friends. I felt somewhat out of place in my rented tuxedo, but I was happy to see my son marrying into a good family. During the reception, I had my first real conversation with Harold and Judith. They were polite, but I sensed a subtle judgment in their questions about my career and home. There was an unspoken class tension that made me uncomfortable. Harold mentioned how they had helped Amanda through her expensive education at least 3 times during our short conversation. I just smiled and nodded, reminding myself that this was about David and Amanda, not about our different backgrounds. After returning from their honeymoon in Bali, David and Amanda invited me to dinner to discuss something important. They explained that despite their good jobs, they were struggling financially. Between student loans, credit card debt from the wedding, and the high cost of rent in the city, they were finding it impossible to save for a down payment on a house. "Dad," David said, looking hopeful, "we were wondering if we could move in with you temporarily, just for 3 months or so until we get our finances in order. We would pay you rent, of course, much less than what we are paying now, but something to help with utilities," Amanda quickly added. "It would mean so much to us, Kevin. We promise we will not be in your way. We just need a little boost to get started on our path to home ownership." How could I say no? My house had felt too empty since Nancy died anyway. I thought having young people around might bring some life back into those quiet rooms. Plus, I understood the struggle of trying to save for a first home. Nancy and I had faced the same challenges, though in a different economic climate. "Of course you can stay," I told them. "Family helps family." That is what Nancy would have wanted. Little did I know that this decision would completely upend my peaceful retirement and test the very foundation of my relationship with my son. The first few weeks of our shared living arrangement went surprisingly well. I cleaned out Nancy's old craft room and the guest bedroom to give David and Amanda their own space. I even repainted the walls in a light gray color that Amanda mentioned she liked. I wanted them to feel comfortable and welcome, while still respecting that this temporary situation was meant to help them move forward. We settled on a rent of $500 per month, significantly less than the $2,000 they had been paying for their apartment. I figured this would allow them to save $1,500 monthly, plus whatever they saved on utilities and some meals. At that rate, I calculated they could have a decent down payment saved within a year. In those early days, Amanda seemed genuinely appreciative. She would bring home flowers occasionally and place them on the dining table. She complimented my home-cooked meals and even asked for some of my recipes. David seemed relaxed and happy to be back in his childhood home, showing Amanda his old bedroom and the treehouse I had built him when he was 10. We established a loose schedule for sharing the common spaces. I would wake early, have my coffee on the porch, and then head out for my daily walk or to meet my friends for breakfast. This gave them privacy in the mornings to get ready for work. In the evenings, we would sometimes share dinner, talking about their jobs or my latest woodworking project in the garage. Other nights, they would go out or order takeout, and I would watch my baseball games in peaceful solitude. But around the 3-month mark, I began noticing subtle changes in our dynamic. Amanda started leaving her designer shoes scattered in the entryway, despite the shoe rack I had built specifically at her request. Coffee cups and wine glasses would be left in the living room overnight. Small things, but they showed a shift in attitude from guest to entitled resident. One morning, I gently mentioned the dishes left in the sink from their late-night snack. "Oh, sorry, Kevin," Amanda replied, not looking up from her phone. "We got in so late and were exhausted. I figured you would be up first anyway and could just add them to your morning routine." Her comment caught me off guard. I had never established any morning routine that involved cleaning up after them, but I let it slide, not wanting to create tension over something so minor. A week later, I overheard Amanda on the phone with a friend as I was coming back from retrieving the mail. She was sitting on the back patio, unaware of my return. "The house is so outdated, but it is free, so I cannot complain too much," she was saying with a laugh. "Very quaint and rustic, if you know what I mean. Definitely not our style, but it is just temporary until we find something worthy of us." I quietly stepped away, pretending not to have heard, but her words stung. This outdated house represented years of my labor and love. Nancy and I had chosen every fixture, every color, with care and consideration. It might not have the modern minimalist aesthetic that was currently trendy, but it was a solid, comfortable home that had sheltered my family through decades of life. As the weeks turned to months, Amanda began redecorating without consulting me. First, it was just adding her throw pillows to the couch. Then she replaced the shower curtain in the guest bathroom. Eventually, she moved family photos from the hallway to make room for abstract prints she had brought from their apartment. When I mentioned that I missed seeing the family photos each day, David jumped in. "Dad, Amanda has a really good eye for design. She is just trying to freshen things up a bit. The photos are still there, just in the spare room now." I began to notice that David nearly always sided with Amanda in any disagreement, however minor. The son who had once valued my opinion on everything from career moves to clothing choices now deferred to his wife on all matters. I tried to be understanding, recognizing that marriage shifts priorities and allegiances, but I could not help feeling that in David's efforts to be a good husband, he was forgetting how to be a good son. 6 months into their stay, David received a promotion at work, which came with a substantial raise. I expected this might accelerate their house hunting process, but instead, Amanda arrived home the following weekend with several shopping bags from high-end stores. "Just a little celebration shopping," she explained when she saw my raised eyebrow. David deserves some nice things after all his hard work. I began to wonder how much they were actually saving. A quick calculation in my head suggested they should have put aside at least $9,000 by now, assuming they were banking David's raise as well. But their spending habits did not reflect a couple aggressively saving for a major purchase. My suspicions were confirmed when I accidentally opened a credit card statement meant for David that arrived in the mail. Before realizing it wasn't mine, I saw a balance of over $12,000 in recent charges at luxury department stores and high-end restaurants. I quickly sealed it back up, troubled by what I had seen but unsure how to address it. I confided my concerns to my longtime friend Frank over breakfast at our regular diner. "Sounds to me like they are taking advantage of your generosity, Kevin," Frank said bluntly. "When exactly was the last time they mentioned moving out or house hunting?" I realized I couldn't remember any recent conversations about their exit strategy. The temporary arrangement was beginning to feel decidedly permanent. "You need to have a straight talk with your son," Frank advised. "Set a deadline. Otherwise, you will be supporting them indefinitely while they live the high life on your dime." I knew Frank was right, but confrontation has never been my strong suit, especially with family. Nancy had always been the one who could deliver difficult truths with love but firmness. Without her, I found myself avoiding the necessary conversation, hoping the situation would somehow resolve itself. Meanwhile, Amanda seemed to be settling in more permanently. She began receiving packages and mail at my address and changed her driver's license information. When a large treadmill was delivered and installed in the basement without any discussion with me, I realized with growing unease that she had no intention of this being a short-term stay. By the 6-month mark of our cohabitation, the dynamics in the house had shifted dramatically. What began as me helping my son and daughter-in-law save money had evolved into something I hardly recognized, where I increasingly felt like an unwelcome guest in my own home. Amanda began hosting her friends regularly for wine nights and book club meetings. These gatherings invariably took over the entire main floor of the house, with 6 or 7 young women talking loudly until late in the evening. The first few times, I made an appearance, offering snacks and trying to be hospitable. But Amanda would introduce me with an awkward, "This is David's dad who lives here," as if I were the interloper rather than the homeowner. Eventually, I began retreating to my bedroom when her friends came over, feeling uncomfortable in my own living room. I would sit in my armchair, watching television with headphones on, trying not to feel resentful as the sounds of laughter and clinking glasses drifted under my door. Amanda also began critiquing my daily habits. My cooking was too heavy and relied on so much butter. My cleaning methods were inefficient. The way I organized my tools in the garage was chaotic. Each criticism was delivered with a smile, and often prefaced with, "I hope you do not mind me saying," but making it difficult to object without seeming oversensitive. David's work hours grew longer as he adjusted to his new position, leaving Amanda and me alone in the house more frequently. During these times, her mask of politeness would slip entirely. "Kevin, could you not watch the news at full volume? Some of us are trying to work from home," she would say, despite the TV being at a perfectly reasonable level. Or, "Do you really need to use the kitchen right now?" I was planning to make a smoothie for my afternoon snack. Small incidents accumulated. My favorite coffee mug mysteriously disappeared, only to be found weeks later buried in the back of a cabinet. The thermostat settings were constantly changed without discussion. The leftovers I had been saving for lunch were thrown out because they looked old. Most concerning was how Amanda seemed to be subtly turning David against me. I would overhear her telling him, "Your dad was so grumpy today," or "I tried to help him with the yard work, but he just shut me down." Neither statement would be true, but David would later approach me with, "Dad, try to be more patient with Amanda. She is really trying to connect with you." I found myself increasingly confused and hurt. Had I somehow become an unreasonable person in my old age? Was I the problem here? Nancy would have known how to handle this situation with grace, but without her, I felt lost. The situation came to a head when I discovered that my personal belongings were being moved or reorganized without my knowledge. The photo albums Nancy had meticulously created over decades were relocated to a box in the garage to make room for Amanda's collection of fashion books. My recliner, the one piece of furniture that perfectly supported my aching back, was moved to a corner to accommodate a new settee Amanda had ordered. When I expressed my frustration to David, he seemed genuinely surprised. "Dad, Amanda was just trying to update the space a bit. She thought you would appreciate having things more organized." "But these are my things, David. In my house," I reminded him gently. A flicker of recognition crossed his face, but it was quickly replaced with defensiveness. "Well, technically, this will be my house someday anyway, right? Amanda is just trying to make it feel like our family home too." His words felt like a physical blow. Yes, I had always planned to leave the house to David in my will, but I had many healthy years ahead of me. The implication that they were already treating my home as their inheritance while I was very much alive and well was deeply hurtful. I decided to have lunch with my daughter Sarah, who was visiting from out of state. We met at a quiet cafe, where I could speak freely without fear of being overheard by Amanda or David. "Dad, this situation sounds toxic," Sarah said after I explained everything. "They are completely taking advantage of you. Amanda is systematically pushing you out of your own space, and David is letting it happen." Sarah had always been the more direct of my children, much like her mother. "You need to set firm boundaries before this gets worse," she advised. "This is your house. You get to decide how things work there." Bolstered by Sarah's support, I finally confronted David one evening when Amanda was at a yoga class. I laid out my concerns calmly, explaining that I felt increasingly uncomfortable and disrespected in my own home. David looked genuinely remorseful. "I had no idea you felt this way, Dad. I will talk to Amanda. We will make changes, I promise." True to his word, David must have spoken to Amanda because her behavior improved dramatically over the next couple of weeks. She was polite, considerate, and even went out of her way to prepare dinner for me twice. I began to hope that perhaps we had turned a corner, that honest communication had resolved our issues. But my hope was short-lived. As soon as David left for a 3-day business trip, Amanda reverted to her previous behavior, only worse. She invited friends over without asking, left messes throughout the house, and was openly dismissive of my requests for consideration. It became clear that her improved behavior had been an act, performed only long enough to appease David and get me to back down. The realization left me feeling manipulated and foolish. The situation reached a breaking point when I discovered some of Nancy's treasured possessions, including her handcrafted quilts and collection of vintage teacups, boxed up in the garage. These were items of deep sentimental value that I had carefully preserved in the hall closet. When I asked Amanda about it, she responded with casual indifference. "That closet was such a mess, Kevin. I needed space for my seasonal decorations, and those old things were just collecting dust. They are perfectly fine in the garage." For the first time since they had moved in, I raised my voice. "Those are not old things. They belong to my wife. They are precious to me." Amanda seemed taken aback by my uncharacteristic display of anger. She muttered a half-hearted apology and retreated to her room, but not before I heard her whisper under her breath, "Dramatic old man." That night, As I carefully returned Nancy's possessions to their proper place in the closet, I came to the painful realization that I was becoming a stranger in my own home. The house that held my most precious memories, that I had built with my own hands for the family I loved, no longer felt like mine. Something needed to change, but I was not yet sure what or how. About a year and a half into our living arrangement, Amanda suggested hosting her parents for dinner. They have not seen the house yet, and I would love to show them where we have been living, she explained over breakfast one Saturday. I felt a twinge of unease. While I had met Harold and Judith at the wedding and a few family gatherings since, I had never hosted them in my home. The subtle class tension I had sensed during our previous interactions made me hesitant. "Are you sure they would want to come all the way out here?" I asked, knowing they lived in an upscale neighborhood about an hour away. "Of course," Amanda insisted. "They are curious about our living situation. Please, Kevin, it would mean so much to me and David." Against my better judgment, I agreed, wanting to support my son and hoping that perhaps this dinner might help bridge the gap between our different backgrounds. In the days leading up to the dinner, Amanda went into overdrive preparing for her parents' visit. She purchased expensive new table linens, fancy wine glasses, and gourmet ingredients. When I saw the receipt she had left on the counter, I was shocked by the amount. What was even more surprising was seeing my credit card number at the bottom. "Amanda, did you use my credit card for these purchases?" I asked when she returned from yet another shopping trip. She had the grace to look slightly embarrassed. "David gave me your card for emergencies when he left for his conference yesterday. I considered this an emergency since we needed everything perfect for my parents. Do not worry, we will pay you back." I seriously doubted that, given their track record, but I swallowed my frustration. David returned from his trip the day before the dinner and seemed oblivious to the tension between Amanda and me. When I tried to mention the unauthorized credit card usage, he brushed it off. "It is fine, Dad. We will take care of it. Amanda just wants to make a good impression." The evening of the dinner arrived, and I had to admit that Amanda had transformed my humble dining room. The table was beautifully set with candles, fresh flowers, and the new linens. The house had been cleaned to a spotless shine, though I noticed some of my personal items had been temporarily hidden away, as if my presence in my own home was something to be minimized. Harold and Judith arrived precisely on time, bearing an expensive bottle of wine and a small gift for me, a gourmet food basket that felt like the kind of generic present you give to a distant acquaintance. Still, I appreciated the gesture and welcomed them warmly. "So this is where our Amanda has been staying," Judith commented, looking around with poorly disguised assessment. "It is certainly cozy. Kevin built this house himself," David said, jumping to my defense. "It is really solid construction." "Oh, how interesting," Harold replied in a tone that suggested it was anything but a real handyman. I bit my tongue. I was not a handyman. I had been a licensed contractor with my own successful business for over 4 decades. But I reminded myself that this evening was about maintaining family harmony, not defending my professional pride. Amanda gave her parents a tour of the house while I finished preparing the roast beef dinner I had planned. I could hear her voice drifting back to the kitchen. "We have made some small improvements since moving in. The place was so dated, but we are slowly bringing it into this century." Again, I swallowed my hurt. The house had been fully renovated just 7 years ago, hardly what anyone would call dated. But clearly, my taste did not match Amanda's definition of contemporary style. When we finally sat down to dinner, Amanda had arranged the seating so that I was at the far end of my own table, while she sat at what would traditionally be the host's position. The symbolism was not lost on me, but I remained determined to be a gracious host. The conversation throughout the meal centered around Amanda and David's careers, mutual friends of Amanda and her parents, and various luxury purchases the family had recently made. I found myself increasingly silent, unable to contribute to discussions about country club memberships and European vacations. About halfway through the main course, Harold asked the question I had been dreading. "So, when do you two plan on finding your own place? You must be eager to establish your own household." There was a moment of awkward silence. David looked uncomfortable, but before he could speak, Amanda jumped in. Well, we have been looking, but why rush? The housing market is so competitive right now. Besides, she added with a light laugh, we basically have a free house and a built-in maid here. The table went completely silent. I froze, my fork halfway to my mouth, not sure I had heard correctly. Harold gave an uncomfortable chuckle. Judith's eyes widened slightly, her expression showing embarrassment at her daughter's comment. David stared down at his plate, saying nothing. In that moment of silence, a lifetime of emotions crashed through me. All the small slights, the growing disrespect, the gradual erosion of my position in my own home culminated in those casually cruel words. And perhaps worst of all was David's silence, his failure to defend me or correct his wife's characterization. I carefully set down my fork, folded my napkin, and rose from the table. I will get dessert ready, I said, my voice steady despite the storm inside me. In the kitchen, I braced myself against the counter, taking deep breaths. Nancy's voice seemed to whisper in my mind, your house, your rules, Kevin. Remember your worth. For 18 months, I had compromised, accommodated, and rationalized away increasingly disrespectful behavior. I had allowed myself to be marginalized in the home I built, all in the name of helping my son and his wife. But in that moment, with absolute clarity, I knew that what I had intended as a generous gift had become a harmful enablement of entitlement and disrespect. The painful truth was that I had not actually been helping them at all. By providing a too comfortable safety net, I had allowed them to avoid the necessary growth that comes from independence and responsibility. And in the process, I had sacrificed my own peace and dignity. As I placed the apple pie in the oven to warm, I made a decision that would change everything. A calm determination replaced my hurt and anger. I knew exactly what needed to be done. I returned to the dining room carrying the warm apple pie and a small decorative box I had retrieved from my bedroom. The conversation had resumed in my absence, though it seemed subdued and slightly tense. Amanda was speaking animatedly about a luxury condo development they had toured just for fun, while David nodded along without much enthusiasm. Here we go, I said pleasantly as I placed the pie in the center of the table. Nancy's famous apple pie recipe. She used to win ribbons for it at the county fair. It looks lovely, Judith said, seeming relieved by my return and the change of subject. I remained standing at the head of the table, the small box in my hands. A strange calm had settled over me, the kind of clarity that comes after a difficult decision has finally been made. Before we have dessert, there is something I would like to say, I began, my voice steady, and something I would like to give Amanda. All eyes turned to me. Amanda looked surprised but pleased, likely expecting some kind of gift. David appeared nervous, perhaps sensing the unusual resolve in my demeanor. First, I want to thank Harold and Judith for coming tonight. It is nice to have you in my home, a home that I built with my own hands for Nancy and our children. This house represents 45 years of hard work, thousands of hours of labor, and a lifetime of memories. I paused, making eye contact with each person at the table. When David and Amanda asked to move in temporarily, I was happy to help. Family supports family, and I understood the challenge of saving for a home in today's market. Nancy and I struggled with that ourselves many years ago. Amanda's smile began to falter as she realized this was not leading to a gift or compliment. The arrangement was meant to be for 3 months, I continued. It has now been 18 months. During this time, I have charged $500 in rent for a house that would command at least $2,800 on the rental market. I have paid all utilities, covered most groceries, and even had my credit card used without permission for expenses like tonight's dinner preparations. Harold and Judith exchanged concerned glances. David started to speak, but I held up my hand gently. Please, let me finish. By my calculations, David and Amanda should have been able to save approximately $30,000 by now, assuming modest spending habits. But based on what I have observed and accidentally discovered, they have saved very little, if anything at all. Amanda's face flushed red. That is not true, We have been saving. Tell him, David. David looked trapped. We have put some money aside, Dad. Not as much as we planned, but how much exactly? I asked directly. David's silence was answer enough. I opened the small box and removed the house keys I had placed inside. Amanda, earlier you referred to me as the maid and suggested that you and David basically have a free house. Since you seem to feel entitled to my home, perhaps you should have these. I placed the keys on the table in front of her. Since I am just the maid and you are the real owners, you should have these. Good luck with the mortgage payments starting next month. The silence in the room was absolute. Harold and Judith stared at their daughter in shock. David's face had gone pale. Kevin, I was just joking, Amanda finally said with a forced laugh. You cannot possibly have taken that seriously. It was just a little comment. Sometimes jokes reveal our true feelings, I replied calmly. But this is no joke. I have already consulted with an attorney. This is my house, my name on the deed, my mortgage that was paid off 10 years ago. And as the homeowner, I am making a new arrangement. I turned to face David and Amanda directly. You have 30 days to either start paying market rate rent of $2,800 monthly or find another place to live. I have been happy to help, but I will not continue to be taken advantage of or disrespected in my own home. Amanda's expression transformed from dismissive to panicked in an instant. You cannot do that. We have rights as tenants. Yes, you do, I agreed. You have the right to 30 days' notice before an increase in rent or eviction, which I am providing now. You also had the right to be treated with respect as tenants, which I have more than fulfilled. What you do not have is the right to live in my home indefinitely on your terms. Dad, please. David finally spoke up, his voice pleading. We cannot afford market rent right now. We need more time. You have had 18 months of time, son, I said, the firmness in my voice tempered with sadness. That was 15 months more than originally agreed upon. The fact that you cannot afford market rent after all this time only proves my point about your financial choices. Harold cleared his throat uncomfortably. Amanda, did you really refer to Kevin as the maid? Amanda's eyes darted between her father and me. It was just a silly comment. He is completely overreacting. And is it true that you have not been saving money during this time? Judith asked, her voice tight with disapproval. After we discussed the importance of financial responsibility, we have had expenses, Amanda defended weakly. David's student loans, my car payment, the same expenses you had 18 months ago when you said you just needed 3 months to get on your feet, I pointed out. Harold, to my surprise, nodded slowly. Kevin, I want to apologize on behalf of my daughter. Her comment was completely inappropriate and disrespectful. And frankly, your generosity has been extraordinary. Most parents would not have been so accommodating for so long. Amanda looked betrayed by her father's support of my position. Dad, you cannot be serious. He is throwing us out. No, Amanda, Harold replied firmly. He is asking you to either pay fair rent or find your own place, which is what adults are expected to do. Your mother and I raised you better than this. The dinner party effectively ended there. Amanda stormed off to the bedroom, with David trailing behind her after muttering an embarrassed apology. Harold, Judith, and I were left sitting awkwardly at the table, the untouched pie between us. We truly are sorry, Kevin, Judith said quietly. We had no idea the situation had deteriorated to this point. To be honest, neither did I until tonight, I admitted. Sometimes it takes a moment of clarity to see what has been happening gradually. As they prepared to leave, Harold shook my hand firmly. You did the right thing. It may not feel like it now, but this is probably best for all of you, including David and Amanda. I nodded, surprised to find an unexpected ally in Amanda's father. As I closed the door behind them, I felt a complex mixture of emotions. Relief at having finally stood up for myself, sadness at the rift with my son, and uncertainty about what would come next. But beneath it all was a solid foundation of self-respect that had been missing for too long. The 48 hours following the dinner party were eerily quiet in the house. David and Amanda remained mostly in their bedroom, emerging only for necessities and avoiding eye contact when our paths crossed. I heard muffled arguments behind their closed door but couldn't make out the words. I maintained my normal routine, refusing to be made to feel uncomfortable in my own home any longer. On the third day, Amanda approached me as I was having my morning coffee on the back patio. She had clearly been crying, her eyes red, rimmed, and puffy. "Kevin," she began, her voice gentler than I had heard it in months. "I want to apologize for what I said at dinner. It was thoughtless and cruel, and I did not mean it." I took a sip of my coffee, considering her words. "Thank you for the apology, Amanda. But I think we both know that comment didn't come from nowhere. It reflected how you've been treating me for quite some time." She sat down across from me, dabbing at her eyes with a tissue. "I know we have overstayed our welcome, but please reconsider the 30-day timeline. We really aren't financially prepared to move right now." "That's exactly the problem," I replied. "After 18 months of minimal expenses, you should have been more than prepared. Where did all that potential savings go?" She looked down at her hands. "We had some unexpected expenses, such as my car needed major repairs. David had a medical bill that insurance didn't fully cover. And," she hesitated, "I might have spent more than I should have on clothes and things for the house." At least she was being somewhat honest now. "The terms remain the same, Amanda. 30 days to either start paying market rent or find another place." Her demeanor changed instantly, the vulnerability replaced by cold anger. "Fine. David is right. You are being completely unreasonable. After all we've done for you, keeping you company when you'd otherwise be alone in this big house, this is how you repay us?" I actually laughed at the absurdity of her statement. "Keeping me company? Is that how you've reframed taking advantage of my generosity?" She stormed off without responding, and I returned to my coffee, more confident than ever that I had made the right decision. Later that day, I overheard Amanda and David arguing in their room. Their voices were raised enough that I could make out parts of their conversation. "You need to talk to him, David. He's your father," Amanda was saying. "I've tried." "He's made up his mind," David responded. "Then we'll have to borrow the money from my parents. We already owe them for the wedding. And after what happened at dinner, do you really think they'll give us more?" Their argument revealed more about their financial situation than they had ever voluntarily shared with me. Apparently they were deeper in debt than I had realized, with significant money owed to Amanda's parents as well as credit card companies. The next morning, I was surprised by an unexpected visit from Harold and Judith. They had called ahead, asking to speak with me while David and Amanda were at work. "We wanted to talk to you privately," Harold explained as I served them coffee in the kitchen, "about Amanda and David's situation." I braced myself for a plea on their daughter's behalf, but what came next surprised me. "We want you to know that we fully support your decision," Judith said firmly. "Amanda has had a pattern of entitlement that we admittedly enabled for too long. We hoped marriage and adult responsibilities would mature her, but it seems she's been repeating the same patterns." Harold nodded in agreement. "We've been worried about her spending habits for years. Credit card debt followed by bailouts from us. We finally cut her off financially right before the wedding, hoping she would learn to live within her means." "Except you paid for the wedding," I pointed out. Judith sighed. "Yes, that was our last major contribution. We promised ourselves it would be the final time, but it seems they've simply found another safety net in you." Their candor was refreshing, and I found myself sharing my own concerns about David's lack of financial responsibility and apparent unwillingness to stand up to Amanda's demands. "We care about both of them," Harold said, "but we agree that continuing this arrangement would only harm them in the long run. They need to face reality." Before leaving, Judith hesitated at the door. "There's something else you should know. Amanda has struggled with impulse control when it comes to shopping. It became quite serious during college. She received counseling for it then, but I fear she may have relapsed. This new information put some of Amanda's behavior in a different light. While it didn't excuse her treatment of me, it helped me understand the underlying issues better." A week after the dinner party, David asked if we could have a family meeting to discuss the situation. I agreed, hoping for a productive conversation. Amanda had arranged for a mediator, a friend of hers who worked in HR, to help facilitate. The meeting was a disaster. What was meant to be a calm discussion quickly devolved when the mediator, clearly briefed only from Amanda's perspective, began by asking how we could accommodate Kevin's needs while allowing David and Amanda to continue living comfortably in their home. "This is not their home," I corrected immediately. "That's precisely the misunderstanding that led to this situation." Amanda burst into tears, claiming I was being deliberately difficult. The mediator suggested I might be suffering from depression after living alone, which was causing me to push away family. David sat silently, looking increasingly uncomfortable as the conversation spiraled. Finally, I'd had enough. "This meeting is over. My decision stands. 30 days, which is now down to 23, to either pay market rent or move out." After the failed mediation, something unexpected happened. David asked to speak with me alone, without Amanda present. We sat at the kitchen table late one evening after she had gone to bed. "Dad, I owe you an apology," he began, his voice thick with emotion. "I've let this situation get completely out of hand. I've failed to stand up for you, and I've allowed Amanda to disrespect you in your own home." The sincerity in his eyes reminded me of the son I'd raised, the one who had somehow gotten lost in his marriage to Amanda. "What's really going on with your finances, son?" I asked gently. The truth this time. David took a deep breath and then laid out the full picture. Amanda had maxed out 3 credit cards without his knowledge. They were making minimum payments on over $40,000 in debt, much of it from Amanda's shopping addiction that had spiraled out of control once they moved in with me and had more disposable income. The money that should have gone to savings had instead funded a lifestyle they couldn't afford. "I love her, Dad, but I'm starting to wonder if I even know who she is anymore," David confessed, tears in his eyes. "The way she's treated you, the lying about our finances, it's not what I want in a marriage." I placed my hand on his shoulder, my heart breaking for my son even as I felt a sense of relief that he was finally seeing the reality of his situation. The next day, David told me he had asked Amanda to move out temporarily while he sorted through his feelings about their marriage. To my surprise, she agreed, packing several suitcases and returning to her parents' home. "I think we need some space," David explained. "I'm not saying it's over, but something needs to change." When I asked what his plans were regarding my 30-day deadline, he looked me straight in the eye. "I'd like to stay for now, if that's okay. I'll pay you proper rent, of course. I need some time to figure out my next steps." We agreed on a fair rent amount, and I set clear expectations about household responsibilities. For the first time in nearly 2 years, I felt respected in my own home again. A week later, Amanda showed up unannounced, asking to speak with me alone. David was at work, and she seemed to know his schedule. "I want to apologize properly," she said, looking more humble than I'd ever seen her. "My behavior was inexcusable. My parents have helped me see how entitled and disrespectful I've been." She explained that she'd started seeing a therapist again to address her shopping addiction and the underlying issues that drove her behavior. "I'm not asking to move back in. I understand that bridge is burned, but I hope someday you might forgive me, for David's sake if nothing else." I appreciated her apology but maintained my boundaries. "I wish you well with your therapy, Amanda, and I hope you and David find a way forward that's healthy for both of you. But our relationship will never be the same, regardless of what happens between you two." She nodded in understanding, and as she left, I felt the closing of one chapter and the uncertain beginning of another. The relationship had been permanently altered, but perhaps in ways that would ultimately lead to growth for everyone involved. 6 months after the fateful dinner party that changed everything, I found myself sitting on my back porch, watching the sunset with a sense of peace I hadn't felt in years. So much had changed in that relatively short time. David had moved out 3 months ago, finding a modest 1-bedroom apartment closer to his office. The rent was reasonable but still required him to budget carefully. For the first time in his adult life, he was completely financially independent, paying all his own bills and learning to live within his means. "It's harder than I expected," he admitted during one of our weekly dinners. But also more satisfying somehow. I finally feel like a real adult. The divorce papers had been filed 2 months ago. After a brief attempt at counseling, David and Amanda had realized their values and visions for the future were fundamentally incompatible. The shopping addiction had been a symptom of deeper issues that neither was equipped to resolve while staying in the marriage. "I still care about her," David had told me, "but I've realized that loving someone doesn't mean you can build a life with them." It was a mature perspective that made me proud, though I knew the path to that wisdom had been painful for my son. My relationship with David had been repaired and even strengthened through this ordeal. Our conversations became more honest and equal, adult to adult rather than parent to child. He sought my advice but made his own decisions, taking full responsibility for his life in a way he never had before. As for me, I had reclaimed not just my house but my sense of self-worth. I no longer felt apologetic about my preferences or needs. I rearranged the furniture back to how I liked it, hung Nancy's photographs in their rightful places, and resumed my woodworking projects in the garage without worrying about making too much noise. Surprisingly, I had maintained occasional contact with Harold and Judith. Our shared concern for David and Amanda initially brought us together, but we discovered we actually enjoyed each other's company once the class pretensions were set aside. They had invited me to dinner at their home twice, and I had hosted them once more at mine, this time with much less drama. "Amanda is still struggling," Judith confided during their last visit. "She's back living with us and resenting every minute of it. She blames everyone but herself for how things turned out." I felt sympathy for Amanda despite everything. Her inability to face her own role in the collapse of her marriage and living situation would likely continue to hold her back from genuine happiness. In contrast, David was flourishing in his independence. After the initial shock of the separation, he had thrown himself into both his career and personal growth. He had joined a financial management class, started hiking on weekends, and even begun dating again, though very cautiously. As for me, I had surprised myself by saying yes when my neighbor Susan invited me to join her book club. At 67, I hadn't expected to develop new friendships or interests, but Nancy would have been the first to encourage me to embrace life fully again. I had also started volunteering at a local construction program that taught basic building skills to at-risk youth. Passing on my knowledge to the next generation brought me immense satisfaction and purpose. David and I even began a project together, renovating my kitchen with new cabinets and countertops. Working side by side, tools in hand, we rebuilt not just my kitchen but our relationship as well. "I understand now why you were so hurt by what Amanda said," David told me one day as we installed new cabinet doors. "This house isn't just a building to you. It's your life's work, Mom's memory, our family history." "Yes," I agreed simply, touched by his understanding. But I also learned something important through all this. A home is more than walls and a roof. It's about respect, boundaries, and honoring the people you share it with. As the months passed, I reflected often on the lessons from this difficult chapter. I had learned that enabling is not the same as helping. By allowing David and Amanda to avoid the natural consequences of their choices, I had actually hindered their growth rather than supported it. True love sometimes means letting people face challenges so they can develop their own strength. I had also discovered that self-respect is not selfish. Setting boundaries and expecting basic courtesy is not asking too much, even from family. Perhaps especially from family. Most profoundly, I had learned that it's never too late to stand up for yourself. At 67, I had found a courage I didn't know I possessed, and in doing so, had possibly saved both myself and my son from years of further dysfunction. The doorbell rang, interrupting my sunset contemplation. It was David, arriving early for our weekly dinner. He carried a small gift bag and wore a broad smile. "What's the occasion?" I asked, as I welcomed him in. "6-month anniversary of me getting my head on straight," he replied with a self-deprecating laugh. "I wanted to thank you properly." Inside the bag was a handcrafted wooden sign that read, "Kevin's house, Kevin's rules." We both laughed, the humor possible now that the pain had faded. Over dinner, David shared news of a potential promotion and his tentative plans to start saving for a house of his own, the right way this time. As I listened to my son talk about his future with clear-eyed realism and genuine excitement, I felt profound gratitude for the difficult but necessary stand I had taken. Sometimes the hardest choices lead to the greatest growth. Sometimes saying enough is the most loving gift you can give, both to yourself and to those who have become too dependent on your sacrifices. Where are you in your journey of setting boundaries with loved ones? Have you ever had to make a difficult choice between keeping the peace and standing up for yourself? Share your experiences in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please hit the like button and subscribe to hear more life lessons from someone who has learned them the hard way. Remember, it's never too late to reclaim your dignity and your space. Thank you for listening to my story, and may you find the courage to protect your own worth, whatever your age or circumstances.